Hello everyone, and welcome back at long last to the 7 Wonders of Genshin series. Today, we'll be taking our first look into Fontaine, the nation of Hydro. This video will only be talking about wonders released in version 4.0, but don't worry, the rest of the locations will be featured in a video next week. Also, this video does contain spoilers for the quests listed on screen now, so if you haven't done those, you have been warned. With that said, let's jump right in. To the north of Sumeru lies the nation of Hydro and Justice, Fontaine. With just one look at this nation from afar, you can see how unique it is compared to the other nations of Teyvat. The entire nation rests atop a massive plateau of water, putting it above the previous nations we have visited in terms of elevation. As a result of this difference in sea levels, both Rome Maritime Harbor and Lumidos Harbor have been equipped with elevators that travel between the two levels of water. Thanks to these elevators, both people and goods have a far easier trip when traveling between Fontaine and the other nations of Teyvat. Of course, there is a reason as to why this mysterious plateau of water exists in the first place. Long ago, a prophecy began circulating around Fontaine that stated all Fontainians will be dissolved into the waters, leaving only the Hydro Archon behind. Throughout the past few centuries, the water levels around Fontaine had been steadily rising in accordance with the prophecy. Many structures from Fontaine's past now rest beneath the waves, including Annapausis and the Institute of Natural Philosophy, both of which I'll talk about in their own sections of this video. Even so, the fact that these buildings were submerged shows the severity of the prophecy, and how the rising seawater could be disastrous. Fortunately though, the crisis of the prophecy was averted thanks to the efforts of Focalors, Farina, and Neuvillette, which I'll bring up later. Fontaine was briefly flooded after the defeat of the all-devouring Narwhal, but the waters quickly receded. These days, the sea level no longer rises, but the beautiful plateau of water still remains. Now, the Fontaine Plateau holds many different islands, one of which is the island of Elynas. However, the name Elynas didn't originally belong to this island, but rather the creature whose remains rest on the surface. Elynas was a massive being that likely originated from the Abyss or Void Realm. At some point, Elynas was found by his mother, who gave him his name and a strong body. From the descriptions we are given, this mother may very well have been Rhine-daughter, meaning that Durin, the Riftwolves, and Albedo are all Elynas' siblings. Much like Durin, Elynas arrived in Teyvat during the Cataclysm, hoping to make some new friends. Elynas was happy in Teyvat, but became sad when he realized that his presence caused suffering for the other races on the surface. Soon, both the Oceanids and the Fontaine Armada went to fight against the disaster brought by Elynas. These Oceanids included Lyris, the director of the Narcissan Cries Institute, and the Fontaine Armada included her vice-director, Basile Elton. The Armada would pursue Elynas for around 35 days, while also defending against incoming monsters from the Abyss. In a final attack, a ship called the Sponsian lunged at Elynas, which caused the ship to be split in half. Shortly after this, Elynas would die, but his consciousness would remain. About 100 years later, René de Petrichor and Jacob Ingold would both enter Elynas' body. Sensing the abyssal power they held, Elynas allowed them to absorb his blood. Jacob would absorb so much abyssal power from the blood that he would eventually transform into an iniquitous Baptist. Sometime later though, the Merusea Phantom would arrive at Elynas to arrest René and Jacob, as they were members of the Narcissan Cries Ordo. Mary Ann Guillotine and her robotic assistant Seymour were among the members of the Merusea Phantom who came to Elynas. Unfortunately, a battle would break out within Elynas, and an explosion would kill many of the people within Elynas' body. Seymour would survive, but still took heavy damage. Jacob and René would survive as well, going on to pursue their goals for the Ordo. In modern times, Jacob even returned to Elynas in an attempt to revive the Great Beast. However, his plan was stopped by the Traveler, Mamere, and Elynas himself, who did not wish to be revived. Jacob isn't the only one who wanted Elynas' power though, as a couple of consecrated beasts can be found around the island. Still, with Jacob's plan stopped, Elynas remains on the island as a fragment of the Cataclysm. Within the body of Elynas, you can find a magical village in which the Melusines live. Sometime after the battle between the Merusea Phantom and the Narcissan Cries Ordo within Elynas, the Melusines would be born. They are intelligent creatures, much like humans, but they perceive the world differently. These differences are due to them originating from Elynas, as he came from the Abyss. Now, the Melusines weren't the only creatures that came from Elynas, as around the same time, Breacher Primuses would begin to appear in the area. These beings would act as cells, protecting both Elynas' body and the Melusines. With their help, the Melusines would be safe from danger. Elynas would also speak to the Melusines, teaching them how to build a village. Soon, Merusea Village would be built within the body of Elynas himself. Eventually, the newly appointed Iudex Nouvelette would meet with the Melusines and would invite them to the court of Fontaine. At first, people were hesitant to accept Melusines into the society, especially with Nouvelette being made the Iudex quite recently. Additionally, there were some strange incidents that happened around the same time that made people trust both Nouvelette and the Melusines even less. Fortunately though, after Vautrin's trial, the people recognized that Nouvelette was a fair and impartial Iudex, and so they began to trust him and the Melusines. In modern times, essentially every Fontainian is willing to protect the Melusines from danger, and many Melusines also help to protect Fontaine as members of the Merusea Phantom. As I mentioned earlier, many structures that were built in Fontaine long ago now rest beneath the waves. One of these areas is Annapausis, which we visit during the World Quest series and of the Narcissan Cries. In this series, we meet a little Oceanid named Anne, as well as a few other Hydro creatures. Eventually, we travel into the spire in the center of Annapausis, going through rooms that seemingly loop forever. Of course, this is all just a trick, and the rooms just look very similar. After we get through these rooms, we reach the real Annapausis, where we meet an Oceanid named Mary Ann. While she does share a name with Mary Ann Guillotine, she is technically not the same person. In version 4.2's World Quest series In the Wake of Narcissus, we finally learn the truth. The Oceanid Mary Ann is actually a hybrid consciousness of Lyris, the director of the Narcissan Cries Institute, and the real Mary Ann Guillotine. You see, after Mary Ann was gravely wounded during the fight in Elynas, Lyris would dissolve and absorb her consciousness. She would then return to Annapausis and take on the appearance of Mary Ann. In the process, she would also accidentally create Anne, who would have memories from both Lyris and Mary Ann Guillotine. Speaking of Mary Ann Guillotine though, there is a theory going around that she has something to do with the Fatui Harbinger Sandrone. In my opinion, I think it is possible that her brother Elaine Guillotine created a puppet to remember Mary Ann by, and this puppet somehow wound up joining the Fatui later on. I'll talk more about this in another video though, so let's continue through Fontaine's wonders. Keeping with the underwater theme, the next wonder for today's video is the Institute of Natural Philosophy. Like Annapausis, this area once resided above the waters of Fontaine. Due to the rising sea levels, however, it now rests underneath the waves, leaving its secrets and treasures behind. In its prime, this institute was run by Dwight Lasker, though it was also of some use to the Narcissan Cries Ordo. In fact, there is an entrance to the Ordo's headquarters in this institute, but I'll be talking about that in the next 7 Wonders video. Anyways, as an institute, this place was home to various different studies. Scarlet Quartz from Dragonspine, Dark Mud from the Chasm, and Primal Constructs from Sumeru can all be found within the ruins. Additionally, researchers here studied the history of Fontaine, and more specifically, the origin of the Oceanids. According to legend, the first Oceanid was born from the first tear shed by the original Hydro Archon, Egeria. However, physical evidence and records suggest that Oceanids predate Egeria's Fontaine and the even older Remuria. Then again, both of these could be true, as Egeria was created by the Shade of Life before the God King Remus created Remuria. After Egeria's sin of using primordial seawater to turn Oceanids into humans, she was put into primeval prison. After the fall of Remuria, Celestia would call upon Egeria, allowing her to rule Fontaine once again. Getting back to the Institute's research on Oceanids though, we also learn about how Oceanids reproduce. It is said that the Oceanids can perform a helix split to divide into little Oceanids, which may have been how Anne was formed from Marianne. Additionally, since the Institute existed after the Cataclysm, we get to learn about the origins of the tainted hydrophantasms. Due to the toxins of the disaster remaining in the soil and the water, deformed Oceanids would be born, with those being the phantasms we see across Fontaine. Moving above the water surface now, let's talk about the Fountain of Lucine, located on the island of Elynas. Gameplay-wise, the fountain acts as Fontaine's version of the Sacred Sakura or Tree of Dreams, as travelers can offer hydro sigils to the fountain for various rewards. At the moment, we can only get the fountain to level 40, but this limit will be lifted when Fontaine's final expansion releases. Now, this fountain is said to be where all water in Fontaine ultimately gathers, including the memories and emotions of the people. Throughout Fontaine's Archon quests, this claim is proven to be true. From the end of Act 2 to the end of Act 5 of these Archon quests, you can hear Furina's crying if you stand within the fountain. We also learn that the consciousnesses of people who are dissolved by primordial seawater all end up within the fountain. After accidentally swallowing primordial seawater, the traveler would briefly meet with an Oceanid at the fountain, who talks about someone by the name of Vache. Soon after this, we would learn that Vache was now going by the name Marcel. It turns out that 20 years ago, his lover Visionaire was dissolved after accidentally coming into contact with primordial seawater. Vache himself didn't dissolve, as he was from Snezhnaya, not Fontaine. After this, Vache would dissolve girls around Visionaire's age for 20 years, hoping to find a solution to bring his lover back. It turns out that all of these girls' consciousnesses ended up in the Fountain of Lucine, eventually forming into an Oceanid. After Vache was found guilty of his crimes, he drank primordial seawater to try and see Visionaire at the fountain. However, he was instead greeted by the Oceanid, who caused him to lose his mind and die from a panic attack. Of course, the Fountain of Lucine still remains on Elynas in front of the Opera Epiclese, and the once vengeful Oceanid who lives in its waters can finally rest peacefully. Speaking of the Opera Epiclese though, that is the final wonder for today's video. This giant opera house is used for all different kinds of performances in Fontaine, including Lydia and Lynette's magic show. Of course, all of the trials in Fontaine take place here as well, making it appropriate for a lift to the Fortress of Meripede to be located out behind the building. Anyways, back inside the building, you can find a mysterious machine at the back of the stage. This is the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinale, and it was responsible for passing the verdict in each and every case. Through these verdicts, it would create indemnitium, which it would use to power Fontaine. However, in the final act of Fontaine's Archon quests, we learned about the true purpose of the Oratrice. During the trial of Furina, the Hydro Archon was given the death sentence. While at first it seemed as though this was directed towards Furina, it was actually directed at Focalors, who resided within the Oratrice itself. It turned out that the Oratrice was actually designed by Focalors to carry out her own execution. Only a small amount of the indemnitium produced by the Oratrice was actually used to power Fontaine. The rest of it went right back to the Oratrice so that it could save up enough power to perform the execution. Once enough indemnitium was saved up, the death sentence would be carried out, killing Focalors and destroying the divine throne of the Hydro Archon. After this, the Hydro Archon's power would be returned to its true owner, the Dragon Sovereign of Water, who turned out to be Neuvillette. With his power restored, Neuvillette was successfully able to save the people of Fontaine from the prophecy. After all of this though, the Oratrice would no longer function. Neuvillette still remained as the Iudex though, so he would give the final verdict in all cases from that point on. He would also gain full control over Merusea power, allowing him to continue powering Fontaine without the need of Indemnitium. For now, Neuvillette will remain in Fontaine as the Iudex, but one day, he must achieve his goal of exacting justice upon Celestia and the Archons who stole the power of the Sovereigns. And those are 7 of the wonders in the nation of Fontaine. I do plan to have another 7 wonders video coming out next week, focusing on the wonders of East Fontaine. In the meantime, I recommend you check out my videos on Chenuvel and Remuria, as both of those may be coming to the game in the 4.x updates. I would love to hear what other wonders throughout Teyvat you'd like to hear me go over in the series in the comments below as well. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further readings are also in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.